What's up, everybody? Welcome to the second episode of the Real Estate of Retail podcast. I'm your host, Jason Ciano from Sabre Real Estate. And if you have not checked out the inaugural episode with Josh Winekrantz from Kimco Realty, I want to urge you to go check that out when you wrap up this episode. On today's episode, we have Andy Segall and Jose Santana from the Segall Group. We learn the ins and outs of how they got started in the industry and how they see the industry changing. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Check it out. Welcome to the Real Estate of Retail podcast. We are your hosts, Jason Ciano and Russell Helbling.
We are retail and real estate experts that focus on emerging concepts in the food, fitness, and wellness sector with a flair for social media and digital marketing.
In this podcast, we'll be discussing the post-internet impact on the retail and real estate industries.
Each episode will feature inspirational guests and thought leaders in their respective fields, giving their input on how they believe retail and real estate will look tomorrow.
Now let's get it poppin'. Welcome to the Real Estate of Retail podcast with our guests Andrew Segall and Jose Santana from the Segall Group. So let's dive right in here. Let's talk a little bit about how you got into the commercial real estate business.
So I'll start, I guess, since it's longer than you. My father, Mark, was one of the pioneer tenant rep brokers in Baltimore, where we're from. He was one of the first people to figure out that you could take a tenant outside of your home market. So he, from growing up, he would spend a lot of time in Virginia. We're an hour from Washington. Washington is a much bigger market, and so he would go wherever the tenants would take him. And he started in the late 60s, and I finished college in the late 80s, went to law school, finished in the early 90s, and I had a pretty good understanding, as good an understanding as you can have of what your parent does, but nobody, I think, grows up thinking I'm going to be a real estate broker when I grow up, at least not a retail real estate broker. So when my father said, why don't you give this a try, I knew I didn't want to practice law. I said, okay. That was in the fall of '92, and this is all I've ever done ever since.
And do you regret that decision?
Not for a minute.
Not for a minute.
It's been a great career and an always changing business.
So you started in the business, obviously, more or less as a result of your family being in the business.
Yes.
Which is pretty common in our industry. A lot of...
I think it's more common outside the brokerage part. I know lots of, father and daughter, father and sons on the development side. On the brokerage side, nobody really cares who your parents are.
Sure.
If you don't get up in the morning and make it happen every day,
very true.
No one ever said, "Oh, you're the son of the great Mark Segall. Here,
right.
What can I do for you?"
Right.
It's and it's even more than that. I kind of wore it as a chip on my shoulder for many years, trying to get my own clients, making my own name, just so people wouldn't think, "Oh, he's there because of who his dad is."
Sure.
So there are other people like that, but I don't know too many.
Yeah, you're right. I would agree on the brokerage side. I was just more generally speaking, there's multi-generational families in our industry.
Absolutely.
But you're right. I can't think of many
who are crazy enough to follow their parent.
Yeah, or right. I was going to say, or just crazy enough to do brokerage. So kudos to you for that. Give us a little. I didn't give you a chance to kind of talk about the company, right? Talk about the Segall Group. So
sure.
Give us a little.
Was it the Segall Group when your father did
it? It wasn't. He was partner with a gentleman named Jerry Trout, and he was about 10 years older than he was. They were together from the late 60s to late 2000s. Long time. He and my dad kind of made a transition into development over the course of time, and my brokerage business was continuing to grow. And there were a lot of things that I wanted to do in brokerage that I really couldn't do without my own platform.
Sure.
And
For instance?
I wanted to do, I understood that we needed a better brand than we had. I think a lot of things with my father's firm evolved just by default without a lot of intention. We had a logo, but it was done by one of the neighbors who was a commercial artist. And, there wasn't really a web presence. There wasn't really a web when they started. So
Sure.
I wasn't even sure I wanted to call it Segall Group. My partner, my first partner, Eric Jacob, who's still a partner, Jose joined us a few years into it, was like, you got to call it Segall because that's the name people know.
Right.
And so we designed the logo, for example. It's very subtle, but if you look at the way the logo is designed, the ALL, the last three letters of my last name, is all caps, because we wanted to convey that it was something bigger than me,
Right.
something bigger than our family, something that people would be proud to say they were a part of.
Right. So inclusive, building a community.
Exactly.
What set you aside from the other companies that were in your market, where brokers can kind of pick and choose where they want to go, and what helped you build that community? Very interesting to me, obviously, as the founder of a brokerage company. So everything you're saying is resonating with me. I'm just curious what you thought about when, obviously, you were starting out, and how you were able to attract talent to the company.
Sure. So, well, for one thing, late 2008, which is when we started, was not a very good time in general, certainly not in real estate. Because of my exposure to the development side, I knew what a site plan and an elevation and a reflected ceiling plan and parking requirements and bulk regulations, and also my legal background. I knew about a lot of different things that brokers don't necessarily know about.
Sure.
Brokers tend to think they have a wider knowledge of things than they actually do. It's actually very slim. What we do in general is a very small in the spectrum of real estate.
Sure.
But because of that exposure, I thought one way to differentiate ourselves would be to hire marketing people at a much higher ratio to brokers than I typically saw. So whereas you have maybe one support person for every 6 or 7 brokers, I wanted it to be like 3 to 1.
Sure.
2 to 1, 3 to 1.
Yep.
And I wanted those people to be able to do something much different than they did when I started in the 90s. I wanted them to be basically artists, people that could do sophisticated marketing, that knew the Adobe suite, that grew up with it,
Right.
not learned it later in life,
Right.
So that we could show people renderings of what their store might look like, views of what their building might look like, even if it wasn't there. I didn't know any brokers that could do that. I knew brokers that could call an architect or an engineer, beg their client, the landlord, to have a drawing done, have it take a long time, have it be wrong, have it go back, get redone, pay for it.
Sure.
I saw that we could crank things like that out quickly, and add value that way.
Yeah, I mean that's very interesting because, as you know, it takes vision to make deals a lot of times, right? It's a lot about the story that you might have in your mind, because clearly the better brokers, first off, I cannot stand the word broker. It almost has a negative connotation.
Right term.
But we like to use the word advisors in a lot of ways, more than broker, because just, that there are people that give that word kind of that negative connotation, right? So when you're going above and beyond, which is what you just described, in order to service clients and help them understand why you truly believe and support, the decision behind suggesting that they go somewhere, or help, a tenant, a landlord client with creative vision that is attractive to tenants that you're trying to obviously get to the project, and how to merchandise the project and things of that nature, I think definitely separates the better brokers from everybody else who are just trying to, match up any square peg they can put in a round hole, so
Throw
to
paper
speak.
against the wall to see what sticks.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that also definitely increased your overhead.
For sure. That's kind of getting back to 2008, the time it was. We were able to hire people we never probably would have been able to afford in a better time.
Yeah.
So that got of course, when you raise a client's expectation, they expect a certain level of service, and hopefully you spoil them to the extent that they don't ever feel like they need to go anywhere else.
Yeah.
And the other part, since '92, we've talked about a client of mine that I referred you.
Yes.
I've known him since 1992, and I'm on probably the 6th company with him.
Amazing.
So some the things that I saw happening were, which are unique to retail, are that you basically, people come and go from the landlords, from the tenants, but our side of the business is kind of forever.
Sure.
We're the only ones that have the institutional knowledge and the history of what's gone on that not everybody has. And what's important is to stick with the people, and the good people will go to the good places. And as long as you support them and you help them produce and make them look good, then you can ride, for as long as they want to work and as long as you want to work.
Absolutely. It's very, very much a relationship business, right? So it's way more important to make the relationship than make the deal, right? I mean, ultimately,
that's all it's about.
We work way too hard to have to, start fresh on every single piece of business.
I feel sorry for people that do industrial for that reason.
Yeah.
Because if they do 30 deals a year, it's with 30 different people, and the next year it's with 30 different people, and they may never see their client ever again.
Yeah. You guys are awfully quiet. Are you part of the podcast?
We're here. This is just
You guys are,
enthralling.
that was the word I was going to use.
Just making sure you guys are alive.
No, we're here.
Yeah, good. So, Jose, why don't you give a little background on yourself and how you got in the business?
So it actually goes back. It all goes back to 2008, right? And that's actually coincidentally when Andy and I met. The shop had just opened up, 3 months.
Where were you previous to that?
I was in working for an outlet developer, and the outlet business was booming prior to that. So it was that's how we got into retail. But I was a lawyer looking for an exit strategy, and the recession provided that, and provided an opportunity to consider something that otherwise I probably wouldn't have. Certainly, going into a commission-based business, from being a salaried guy. I know, insane people. But it was a great moment in time to change course, and so that's what we did, and we opened up the office at that time, and none of us have looked back. So it's been, I knew. We were doing a lot of leasing work in the outlet shop that I mentioned, and I knew I could do the work that the leasing guys were doing, if not as good, better than they could do it, and be more creative than the type of work that I was doing as a lawyer, which is one of the things that I like about the industry. I think the better advisors are people that are, creative and can read more than just the site plan and the characteristics of a deal. They can read the players involved.
Sure.
and get them to a level of comfort with the advice that you're passing on, or the opinions that you're giving about whatever it is that you're looking. Ultimately you're helping people whose job is on the line if they're making a good or bad decision. And the longevity that Andy talks about with clients is a result of doing that part of the deal well.
Sure.
And so I knew I knew I could do it, and I just needed an opportunity and somebody that would provide a platform, and that's where we ended up.
Excellent. And Andy, quick question for you. What advice would you give your younger self when you were just getting started in the business?
Well, I got a lot of advice from my dad and from his partner.
Sure.
They were like the professors. I listened to the last podcast, and I heard Josh say, I would have told myself, be patient because it takes a long time. And, I think I don't know better advice because, you get into brokerage and it's 3 years before you even know what's going on.
Yeah.
And you know where you fall in the food chain and what you like to do and how you can fit in. I remember the first time that I gave somebody advice and they repeated it back to me late, like the next day.
Sure.
And it was the first time I realized that people were hearing what I said and like took it to heart. And that was a big deal for a young broker because everything in our business really comes down to confidence. When you advise people, first of all, people don't listen to people that don't say things in a confident way. And in our business, they sense the lack of confidence instantly. It's
Sure.
like within, a split second, right?
Absolutely.
So to be confident, you need to know what you're talking about, but you need to understand how to convey information in a way that people can understand it, that they can in turn pass it on to the people they report to. But you're not really at that point when you start, and it's years, when you
I think
before you
3
can do
years
it.
is generous to be that much of a trusted advisor. I think at 3 years you can navigate around the world and understand how to put a deal together. But I think it took me longer to feel the real confidence to be able to know that my opinions that I was giving to the clients were the right ones.
To
and
speak
the
with any
accurate
level of
ones.
authority.
Right.
Or,
To some extent, that's
To get enough deals under your belt.
Sometimes it's a function of how much people are mentoring you.
Sure.
I mean, if you're left to your own devices and you don't really have any direction, and nobody's telling you what to spend your time on, it'll take longer. You'll be wandering around for a while, and this is also a business of knowing how to spend your time. I liken it to a portfolio. You have to invest a certain amount of time in things that have a higher likelihood of happening, and a certain amount of time in lesser likelihood things, but there's a bigger payoff.
Absolutely.
And the payoffs are usually relative to the chances,
Right.
right?
Yep.
And if you spend too much time on the things that are home runs, you're going to be very disappointed.
Sure.
And in a commission-based business, you have to have, a mix, and you need somebody to tell you that you need to do that.
That was like the best advice I ever got early in the business. It was from Gary Trock, actually. So he's a broker at CB, longtime city broker, and he's my good buddy from college, his uncle. So when we was first in the business, he's like, one thing I'll tell you. He goes, everyone wants to talk about these big glamorous deals that we're doing in Times Square, et cetera, et cetera. He goes, I focus on the singles. And if you focus on the singles, you're going to be able to pay your rent and feed your family and pay your car. And then you have a couple of doubles and one home run every 2-3 years, and you'll make a lot of money. And I've made sure to focus on those singles because the singles happen.
Yep.
They happen. And they're smaller, but they happen.
They also pay the bills,
Right.
right? You need to hit singles and doubles frequently in order to also keep your eye on the larger deals that have typically a lower likelihood of
I
happening.
think to that effect, and we've talked about this a lot, is that those put money in your pocket. So when you're able to give advice from a completely non-biased perspective, because you're not working on this one deal to be so focused on like, I need this commission to be able to literally pay for my car next month. Right. So if you take that out of the equation, you could give honest and accurate and non-biased advice. And I think we always talk about it, they smell that desperation of that need of money from a broker, right? That's 100%. A broker. And the second you do that, like you've lost credibility. So when I do confidently say we should kill this deal, we're not doing it. It's stupid.
It's a crazy concept if you think about it, because you're as conflicted as it gets.
Right.
You need the deal to make a living.
Yeah, but that's such. We have a lot of younger people and people that we train in the business. And it's such a challenge to get them to understand that you have to be patient, right? And you have to. That's why when I sit down with somebody who wants to get into the business, I am so brutally honest with them, because I do not want to have this conversation 6 months down the road where they're like, "Wait a minute, you told me that I would be making money by now," and it's no, you have a long way to go.
And similar to you guys, we. And Andy talked a little bit about kind of the back of the house and the marketing, and we spent a lot of effort in making sure that the folks that are with us are that the culture of the company is all, everybody's kind of on the same page and reading from the same music sheet to some degree. And, we realized that it didn't make a lot of sense for us or for the culture that we were trying to create to have, a bunch of sales people, running around trying to, cutthroat each other and who could get to the finish line faster and, without sharing a lot of information. And, and you can certainly have a successful shop that way. Yeah. And there are a lot that we can, all name.
Sure.
That's not what we wanted. That's not where we wanted to park our hat and, go to work every day. And it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of energy and focus to do that, because the business is completely, the other way.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting perspective. When we started in 2011, we grew really fast with intention of hiring, really honestly disrupting the marketplace in New York Metro. I mean, that was really, I no longer wanted to be part of one of the largest commercial real estate companies in the world. And in my previous life, I had a better experience doing retail brokerage for a boutique firm. Mm-hmm. And, I was honestly just trying to figure out where I was going to go next, and all of my options were more or less what you just described. And I figured if there was no place that I really wanted to go, I almost felt responsible for creating it. Yeah. And that was the inspiration behind Sabre. And it's funny because, we grew fast and furious and managed a whole bunch of salespeople that would, sometimes stab each other in the front, not even the back. And as you get gray hair and mature a little bit, you realize that it's the culture is so important, and you have to really understand who's right for your culture, and not where you are, but where you're going. Yeah. And we focus on that every day.
Right.
Yeah, we have an open. Well, we have a couple things we do. One is an open, I don't want to call it database, but a file platform. So anybody that wants to see my files can see them. Anybody wants, and that started because I was trying to turbocharge younger people and say, look, just go to that form and copy that and adapt that. It was just easier for me to tell them where to go than for me to pull it out and whatever. But it occurred to me that if I couldn't trust the people, with that openness, they weren't going to be with the firm. Yeah. So why not make it easier for everybody, make it equally accessible? Obviously, if there are things that have to be confidential, that can be put in a place where they don't have permission to go see it. But it just felt much better to have people that needed to learn have access to the collective correspondence and history and plans and information that we had. So we developed, we knew we needed a commission tracking software. And I think I talked about this at the retreat.
Yes, you did.
So when we did that, we realized that when you do a transaction, you create a comp. And so wouldn't it be great if we could geocode the comp to be on a map, that if you needed the information sometime later, you would see what at least everyone in the company has done. People could add the sales to it. So it has blank, has a facility for adding that.
It's great.
And then you could add other information that you got along the way.
Right.
And as a result
color
of that,
coded basically.
Color coded just to the extent of retail versus restaurant.
Okay.
But if you needed to keep it secret, you could deny permission. So somebody could see that it was there, but they'd have to call you and ask you for it instead of just seeing it for themselves. So there's a way to protect the information. But the idea was, let's not collect comps for the sake of a committee for one deal and then just put that in a file drawer and lose it forever.
Smart, very smart.
Those are the kinds of things I think the better firms should want to do.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise you're reinventing the wheel and you're forcing people to
it's all about
duplicate effort.
Efficiencies, process. We give our people all of the tools and resources and the benefit of the doubt to be really successful. and it's nice when there's that reciprocity and respect for allowing them to have all of those tools and information. And then every now and again, you get a bad egg, so to speak, right? And I think any business owner goes through that. It's just inevitable, but in order to keep the culture that you're working really hard to create, it's very important that you have like-minded people that are all sipping the Kool-Aid, so to speak. So I want to just transition a little bit into how has the industry changed over the years that you've been in the business?
Yeah, I'd also like to hear just being around it, seeing your dad do it, then you starting in '92 to 2018,
Sure.
the life cycle that you've seen and how it's changed.
I can remember to get aerial photographs of properties, going to the aerial photographer's house in Annapolis.
Who had an airplane?
Who had an airplane, who flew it sideways to take the picture out the window.
That is insane.
Would show me the negatives. I would pick the ones that I wanted, and then 3 or 4 days later, it would come between two pieces of cardboard in the mail, and then I would take rub-on graphics to label the streets one letter at a time, the traffic counts, one number at a time, in the conference room, hour after hour.
I started in the business at that time, so I'm at an age where I'm really in the middle of the traditional, original Hagstrom map way of setting up everything to the heavy use of technology today, and it was
a manual operation.
It's unbelievable.
I have some of the older maps. Again, when I started and took over the Starbucks account, a lot of the historic maps were just like color coded, those little dots, like the little sticker dots on like an old Hagstrom, and I was like trying to figure out, what did you mean by this, Jay?
I probably still have a drawer full of dots. Those dots were great.
Oh, they were.
And they were like the acrylic ones that were, and then the sight arrows, to your point, that pencil over and rub off.
Yeah. It's funny to even think about that.
It is.
Like yellow was a grocery store and red was a potential site. And,
that's right.
Yeah, it was hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, but that's what's so interesting about the niche that we live in, right? I mean, the real estate industry as a whole is very large, and I think the retail side of it is a very niche, small kind of group that's within that larger segment, obviously, and we all speak the same language. We
see each other's marketing materials.
Sure.
I mean, before the web, people saw each other's tour books because the reps would say, well, this is what my Chicago broker did for me. So you would have to do what the Chicago broker did if it was better than what you were doing, and that's how people figured out. And now you see that on the web. Certainly the marketing piece has gone from this utilitarian arrow pointing to the site thing to here's some images of the neighborhood and here's what it feels like.
Right.
That's where it's gone, and to some extent, in some cases, a little overboard, I think.
Yeah.
But I understand why it's evolved that way, because there's only so much you can tell from a high aerial of a place. So, you can try, we invested in a drone.
Yeah.
Jose is the license for it. So if I crash it, I just give him the controls. He takes the
It's all your
blame.
fault.
But
Wait, you
what?
need a license? No, I'm kidding.
We have several drones and several people operating them. So, yes.
Yeah, you can either own or operate, or you can do the sensible thing and hire somebody else.
Yes.
But, what it amounts to is you're trying to convey something to people that may never come to look at the site, as best you can.
Right.
So that
You're
they can
telling
make
that
a
story.
good decision.
Yeah. It's all about
something that-
supporting the decision logic behind a deal, essentially, and
Well, and so obviously marketing has changed, and I know there's a lot of discussion about the retail landscape as a whole. So I'd be curious to hear from both of you guys how you've seen the landscape change since you started in the outlet world, and then from 2008 on, and then you historically.
The audience can't see
well, it's
who
interesting 'cause-
you is.
I'm sorry,
Russell.
Jose.
Yeah, thank you.
The younger one.
Well, we have a video camera, so
Yeah, but
well, this is a podcast. Sorry, I'm getting used to it, guys. Don't fault me.
No,
for
no,
it.
it's interesting because every obviously everything's evolved. You know, in the outlet context, you know, I'm not sure that that model of 50 miles down the interstate as a destination. That we started seeing that change, the people relaxing their restrictions and moving closer and closer to the urban cores to a point that outlets today are, the business model is tougher, especially with the research capability that the consumer has to hunt for deals. You don't necessarily need to go somewhere to feel like you got a deal, because it ultimately always was, I feel like my dollar went further. Obviously, square footages have changed. People are looking for the experience, whether it's doing something or feeling something, or being around others doing the same thing, and so we've seen some of the retail boxes change. From the traditional use to something like trampoline parks, and we were talking about axe throwing places, and a lot of service. I think those are things. Food and service are things that are never gonna escape the.
yeah, well, you can't. These are all segments of our world that can't be replaced by the internet.
Correct.
Right.
People are always going to want to get their hair cut by somebody. Even if you,
What if you own a Flowbee though, and you could just hook your vacuum?
then I feel sorry for you.
I mean, I might like a robot haircut. That might be cool.
There's the experience of the barber shop. There's the experience of the salon.
Sure.
So that's what we see. More than anything. And I'm sure you guys, that you can say the same thing in your market.
That we've been talking about also, Jay and I. See what I
Oh,
did there?
thanks.
Jay and I have been talking about when is too much in the service, when is too much in fast casual food. When is there not going to be enough piece of the pie for everybody to be able to carve out a place?
I was watching the Stoller Report last night, and Gene Spiegelman from Cushman and Wakefield was talking about he said that 40% of the active tenants, and this was, the episode was definitely, I think, at least 6 months old or so, but 40% of the active tenants that they're working with are restaurants. On the last podcast with Josh, we were talking about, and I think Josh was kind of surprised, that we were talking about, one of our very strong fast casual clients is pumping the brakes because of the amount of competition, how many seats that there are in the market. And it doesn't matter if they're actual directly competitive, serving the same type of food. It's just options, right? So
they've essentially cannibalized each other by providing a lot more options for the consumer, and we've seen that as well.
And when does that happen in fitness, right? And when does that happen in every other category that's super active right now, because they can take advantage? It's a flight to quality, right? It's never been a better opportunity for tenants to open up in New York City, right? I mean, half the spaces are vacant, and clearly there's a correction going on there. But what other types of tenants, other than the obvious things that we're seeing that are backfilling, spaces of traditional companies that are old and tired and not keeping up with the times? There's a lot of that space coming available. So it's, what, and there's only so many fitness and service and restaurant concepts that can backfill that space. I'm still looking for the next uses that we don't really know about.
The next it. Yeah.
Well, I remember at least more in Washington, when the food truck craze hit,
right,
and all the restaurateurs said, we hate this because, it's just, they're pulling up right in front of our door in a lot of cases, and they can operate for a fraction of the cost that we can, and, it's just not fair. And then maybe about 5 years ago, the food hall thing started, which to me is sort of an in-between the food truck and the full-fledged, restaurant. And, the food hall thing, I think, is here to stay, because really what it is a food court, just for the new millennia. I mean,
Sure.
That's what people want. It's more interesting. It's able to be rotated in and out quicker if it gets stale. and it has a social component because it's wide open seating in common.
Sure.
And whereas the food court kind of got stale, where it was once an innovative kind of a thing that lets you get it more of a convenience thing. I think people consider the food halls now the anchors in a lot of places because you actually
Drive traffic.
have a nice experience at
Yeah.
them. It's not just about being there for 15 minutes and, throwing away the trash and getting on with the shopping. So there was one that I went to over the weekend called The Block in Annandale, Virginia, Asian themed food hall next to a Kmart. And on a rainy Sunday, it's packed with all kinds of different people. I think it was maybe 5 vendors and a bar. That's, replicable.
Yeah.
If you have the right sort of venue for it.
So 5 vendors. How big was it?
Probably about 8,000 feet. It was hard to tell exactly because there's a big
Right.
back of house that you don't see. But in that particular case, and I know there's a number of different models for these, I think the actual operator owned all but 3 of them or something like. He owned more than half plus the bar, and then subcontracted or sublet
Got it.
2 of the things that he didn't know how to do.
Right. But he was doing, so he started the ones that he owned from scratch. They weren't like a licensing deal with something. Or
Correct.
other.
He started them
Got
from
it.
scratch. So
That
I
takes
know,
a different level of talent and commitment.
for sure.
Clearly.
And maybe his plan is either to do more of those type of things, or it's to take the more successful ones and make a restaurant out of them. I know
Right.
a lot of people think of
Smart.
these as an incubator for
Very smart.
for something.
They're also
bigger.
different menus. I mean, it's a 2-3 item, really well done that people identify it,
Right.
with, and that's why it works.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I do think that the food hall thing is great when done well in the right areas.
Yep.
I think that converting every food court in a B and C mall is ridiculous. And I think that, there's a time and a place for everything. Everybody's just trying to be really cool. It works some places and not others.
Yeah, but I think a surprising case study there was at Roosevelt Field where they completely converted their food hall. They spent an ungodly sum of money redoing it. And on one side, it's the traditional food court players, the
Panda Express.
and like the bourbon
Sbarro.
chicken.
Is Sbarro still
no,
around?
but Patsy's is there. But on the other side, they
That's
did
retro.
more,
Very retro.
like funky New York City hip kind of.
So it's got a different theme on the other side.
Every one of them is, except for Moaz or Mao's. Or
My favorite.
It's the one we eat at. It's closed. There was a
The
great
falafel place?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a great taco place that closed. There was Brother Jimmy's open for like 3 days. They closed. A barbecue guy out of the city. It just has been the Potatopia was a potato-driven, which the product was good, closed, and now there's some vacancies and actually
Was Trace Carnes in there?
Trace Carnes
Yeah,
was the Mexican guy, and that food was
yeah.
great. Out of the city, they do a great job, and they closed, and now they're doing a Chick-fil-A, and who knows what'll happen.
But sometimes that's a function of, obviously rent, and that's a really simple comment, but it's a landlord can dictate and tell you this is what people are paying and this is what you're going to pay, and it may not be sustainable for a concept. And there are, we have seen some landlords, some of the more creative ones, identify a user, identify the type of player that can resonate with the folks that are around it, whether it's an urban core, whether it's in a more of a traditional mall setting, and work almost in partnership with them.
Sure.
We've seen that also in less traditional contexts where there's a bar in Baltimore on a 3rd level, behind an avenue, a space that if you walked in there today, you'd say, this is brilliant.
Did we go there together when we were?
No,
no?
but you'd
It's not near your office. No.
You'd walk in there and say, this is brilliant.
Yeah.
And it took the vision and the creativity and also the help financially, not
Right.
just a TI check,
Right.
but to say, look, let's figure this out, that it makes sense for you, so that I'm not, having a weird conversation with you 8 months down the road when you're not hitting the numbers you thought you were going to hit. Right. And to your point earlier about, some of the rent corrections in New York City, you can see that across the board. And it's probably time that it happens in a lot of the major markets, DC, Northern Virginia, where you can command the rent and some people will sign up for it. And then the concept 12 months down the road says, we need to talk. And that doesn't help anybody.
Right. And landlords and developers should be partnering with the tenant to, try to help ensure some level of success as opposed to just drive every dollar. Right. So
you hit the pro forma no matter what. And
I mean, that if you're talking about changes in real estate, probably the biggest one on the landlord side is the institutional ownership of real estate. It's much higher percentage than it was certainly when I started.
Right.
It was a lot of families that own shopping centers, and they did things because they probably were merchants originally themselves that had the anchor store. They cared about the mix. They wanted to partner with the retailers because they wanted the right use. To some extent, the better REITs do that, but to a greater extent, probably they don't. They're more interested. They have shareholders to answer to. They have to drive rents. If they can't drive rents, they sell, and they buy something that they can. And that's
it's interesting because I do think today that even the larger institutional owners are definitely more curious about the unique regional or local tenants, because that's what gives them authenticity, right? So how do you, every shopping center could literally at this point just be a well-known grocer, TJX, Orange Theory,
and PetSmart.
PetSmart. Who needs to have 10 of those in a 2-mile radius, right? It becomes super generic, and I think that's where the industry, kind of where it went. And I think a big part of the change right now, the revolution of, an evolution, I should say, of where retail is today and going is, you can't just have a P.F. Chang's and a Brio and a California Pizza Kitchen in every mall exterior entrance restaurant and think that everybody's going to be pumped to go to the mall and eat at those. So, I do see Simon already making those thoughtful decisions on how to elevate their restaurant offerings and how to find, the stronger, unique, local, regional player that is definitely going to drive traffic and differentiate the property and give them a better, economic deal to go there. That's definitely happening, and I think it's long overdue because every mall, in New York and New Jersey, where we spend most of our time, obviously, is become very similar, right? And with Houston's and Hillstone, pulling out of most mall settings, there's almost no place I want to eat at a mall.
Right.
Yeah. The other thing, as you were saying that, I was thinking, when anybody gets, it seems like some level of success, retail or restaurant-wise, there's private equity, like chasing them down to throw money at them.
Yeah.
And that didn't exist in the 90s. They were family owned, they were entrepreneurs, but now that's completely changed what we do. I think the committees that we are preparing information for have board members who are on the private equity side. They're not really the retailer necessarily.
More often than not,
they're watching the money and watching how it's spent and want to make sure the decision logic's good. And
how do you think that's affected the brand itself?
I think, first of all, if it weren't for private equity, we tenant reps wouldn't have a whole lot to do. It is, in a lot of cases, private equity doesn't do good things, but as far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't have a job if it weren't for them.
Right.
So I can't, say that it's a bad thing. I think that for a tenant rep, you were asking me what I would advise a young person. It would be learn who has the money and where they're placing it, because that's going to tell you what, perhaps a smarter person who's looking at the potential of this business, where they think it's, where it's going, where it's going to grow. attach yourself to the people making those investments, because they're going to steer you to the people that are going to be making a lot of deals. And hopefully that continues. Hopefully retail and restaurants continue to be an appealing place for people to invest. I think, that I don't see that changing. I think that, I think if anything, it's become easier to identify promising concepts and support them. The degree that they have success may depend on how good the private equity people are in getting the founder, the entrepreneur, to set up the systems and have the right people there to support the growth. Because a lot of times they don't.
Right.
But that's a big change. I don't ever remember so many retailers being owned by Bain Capital and by Catterton and those, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, because the IPOs for a while were the way companies grew on a large scale. Not so much anymore.
Yeah, we're also starting to offer a lot more to our tenant clients, as opposed to just designing their rollout strategy and executing it. And I think that's another big.
You're steering them toward
investors?
Or?
No, well, yes. I mean, in some cases, I've been heavily involved in helping my clients, decide what private equity partners right for them, and ultimately involved in the negotiations of those deals. So yes, but I wasn't even referring to that. I'm talking more about being a lot more data driven than a lot of other, quote unquote brokers, right? I'm throwing up air quotes since nobody's watching.
I saw them.
You saw them?
Yeah.
I actually wasn't. But I think that a lot of people that are designing rollout strategies are just saying, oh, if Chopped is there, it would probably make sense for us to locate nearby them, as opposed to actually understanding who's there, right? Understanding the core customer of the company that you're working with, right? Trying to duplicate the wins in their existing portfolio and limit the failures, and approaching it that way, as opposed to saying, hey, McDonald's is there, we're Burger King, we should probably go right next to them, right?
What's interesting though is that those brands, that is their barometer. So,
sure.
If you ask Wendy's, they're like the first question out of their mind, which I do Wendy's work.
Where are the arches?
Where is McDonald's? Okay, and what do they do in sales? Okay, we want to be there.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm clearly not referring to those types of tenants when I say this. I'm talking more about the younger, companies that are emerging.
Not
that
30,000 stores or something?
Yeah, I'm talking, 0 to 100 units, and are deciding what market they want to go into next and why. Because, you have, in a lot of cases, you have master brokers for companies that are trying to, retain as much territory as possible, and they're taking the easy way out, which can really hurt a company down the road, right? And especially when the company's raising money and they have to deploy it, they're just growing in some cases aimlessly.
Yeah, so and that's what I said earlier, and that's what I think the challenge for a lot of the polished casual users that we're seeing is it's a fine line to balance, right? So private equity is good. I agree. It's keeping us in business and helping us do more deals. But when private equity invests in a concept, they want you to spend it and grow and build more stores.
So but still. Yeah.
When you get an infusion of $50 million and you have to go spend it all, and you only have, let's say, 15 stores, right? Which a lot of these guys are getting big money. It's like, all right, go open 20 this year. Like, how do you do that from an operational perspective and scale that quickly?
Especially if you're a restaurant.
Right, especially if you're a restaurant, because it's all about the quality consistently across the brand. Then you open up a bunch of restaurants that aren't operationally successful. It dilutes the brand. The good stores can't prop up the bad stores, and now your individual store profitability gets hurt. This profitability across the portfolio gets hurt, but then you got to go raise more money at not as great terms, and you got to invest it back into the stores, and it's like a vicious cycle.
And God forbid, close a few units, right? I mean, that's that everybody's reluctant to close units that are not performing because it's a negative impact on the brand, but sometimes it's the best decision, clearly. And I think
right. But in private equity wants returns now. It's not like, well, you need to give it 18 months to breathe and grow. It's like
there's all different types of philosophies that these companies have, and I think that's really why when we're working with a client, not just on a rollout strategy, when we're digging deeper than that, it's very important to understand. So what are your goals, and what's your exit strategy? Where do you want to? What are you growing this for? Do you want to plant flags in major urban markets and open in New York, Chicago, Miami, and kind of plant a flag there, open one kind of flagship location? Or are you trying to, grow organically throughout the Northeast and, hit a lot more penetration per the population, right, per capita, but still being thoughtful about cannibalization, while you're doing that. A lot of when you meet with the founders of these companies, they don't know the answer to those questions. They're listening to a lot of unqualified people in some cases as to why they should be doing what, and they're typically the successful ones are just really good at getting the company where it is today, and not necessarily making those long-term decisions on where the company should grow, why, and how.
I think a good broker can make a difference setting the right expectation for how many can get done, how many are worth doing.
Yep.
What real estate costs, and a bad one can do a lot of damage.
Absolutely.
As you say, because if they head down the wrong road, it takes a lot. It's very distracting for a company to have to try and turn around a bad store. It saps them of energy. It takes the better people, or it makes them more willing to go elsewhere. A lot of people that aren't exposed to real estate think a lot of times that it's a logistical exercise, that if you want to have 5, it's just a matter of 6 months of effort, and then 6 months later you'll be open, and then 6 months later it'll be,
Right. It
doesn't work that way. If you can obviously set priorities and targets, but they're not going to happen in the order from 1 to 10 necessarily.
Sure.
So, you have to educate people a lot of times. They have to understand that, it's going to happen somewhat as it can happen. You're going to be there the minute something can happen, but you don't control the timing.
Right.
You're not producing something.
Got to be as strategic as possible, and we always do advise our clients that that's the way to do it. But you have to. Whenever I'm doing a market entry, it's like, here's where you want to be, but if this opportunity comes up, if you really want to grow in this market, you need to take some opportunities and run with them, and I think they'll surprise you at how well they'll do. And
there's so many outside circumstances that we're not in control of, and timing of available strong real estate
for sure
is one of them. So we've been chatting here for a while, and this has been great so far.
Let's change it up.
Let's change it up and dive into some unrelated, non-specific industry questions. I'm going to give you guys both the opportunity to answer each one. And in the spirit of time, we'll just go with 2 of them. So I'll start with you, Andy. You have to go on a road trip from New York. We decided it was to Boston, I think, last
4
week.
hours.
Yeah,
we thought it was,
as opposed to 3 days.
If you're okay with a 3-day trip, we could do California also.
Yeah,
it's up to you.
Either way, you have to bring 3 people. Who are they?
So I thought about this a little bit. One of my favorite stories, movies, real life events, is the story of Apollo 13.
Sure.
Because Houston, we have a problem is like, to me, the greatest line of all time, of somebody who is in a dire, horrendous situation, might end up in outer space, freezing, with no one even knows, no one ever see them again or hear. And he says, Houston, we have a problem. And they solve it. They aim the thing back, they shoot the blast, and they get it back to Earth. And so Jim Lavelle would be I would like to be in a car with him, asking him what exactly went through your mind? Were you like really panicking, or were you really thinking you were going to figure a way out of it?
That's a great
And
one.
that's one. I've been reading a book. You may have heard of it. It's actually two books. The first one's called Sapiens. The other one's called Homo Deus. They're by an Israeli neuroscientist, although his intellect is wide. He covers a lot of ground. But it's basically the history of human beings. One thing that we tend to take for granted is that Homo sapiens were the only humans, which is not the case. There were at least one other race, or one other species, I should say, called Neanderthals. And he talks about why the sapiens became the preeminent species of human being. And his thesis is that it isn't because they were bigger or stronger, because the Neanderthals, they know from archaeological evidence, were bigger and stronger. It's because they were able to act collectively in a much more effective way than their counterparts. And in the follow-on book, which I'm about a third of the way through, he talks about the fact that throughout history, royals, leaders, political heads of state, died of the same illnesses that that the less privileged had.
Sure.
And that in the future, because of our knowledge in artificial intelligence and genetics, people that have the means will actually be able to physically change their bodies and live longer. And when that happens, how will they treat everybody else? And the nearest thing he can think of to how that might be is how humans now treat animals, and how important it is to treat animals humanely, because there will be a time when humans won't be on par with each other. And that's a very interesting thing to me. So that's another person I would like to talk to at length about.
That's
3 days. They could get a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's going to California. He's not going to
on
Boston.
that one, you're going to California. And two things. I was at the Museum of Natural History with my family last week, and there was some interesting perspective on that. So I don't know if you've been there recently.
The D.C.?
No,
or New York?
Yeah.
No.
That's number one. And then number two, based on that answer, I actually might pick you to be in a car with me if I'm ever asked this question, because there's clearly a lot of things that I'd like to know that I think you could help me with. Third person.
Those are the two that
Two?
Yeah.
Okay.
Two works.
Jose?
Yeah.
3 people. I don't know. I'd need somebody that can come up with really good music, really good playlist, really good, just the soundtrack.
You're looking at two of them.
I think the soundtrack to anything is critical.
Well, you're copping out. You gotta
So you
pick
need, like,
So do
somebody.
you want names?
Like Trent
Yes.
Reznor, he's a great soundtrack
Right.
guy.
No,
or a DJ.
yeah, I'd
You want to
definitely travel.
DJ Khaled because of his
Another one.
Snapchat?
No, I definitely have to travel with my one of my dear friends from college. Nobody's going to know him, but
Doesn't matter.
he's my chief
That's
of
fine.
staff.
Okay.
2 other people. I don't know. I like the.
They could be alive. They could
No,
be
'cause-
dead. They could be celebrity. They could be regular
My
person.
fear is that they would try to make decisions, and you'd have to appease.
So you're driving.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely driving, and they're not telling me when to stop and where we're going. And I guess that's a reflection of who I am. So it's tough. That's a tough question.
Fair
So
enough.
You'd probably be flying to California.
I'd probably be flying. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
so
true.
Not a road trip guy.
no, that's for the birds.
Andy, this one's for you. What are you great at?
Does anybody want to say what they're great at?
Okay, you could boast
It's
a little
fine.
bit.
And what we mean by that, I just want to understand something that the audience, even if they know you, probably would not be aware that you're good at. Let's maybe say good, so you don't feel like you're boasting.
We'll keep it in the realm of professional activity. It's been noted that after so many years of doing this, my instincts for predicting the future are pretty sharp. So if I see a situation, I pretty much know how it's going to come out, and I'm pretty good at, directing my efforts accordingly.
Love that.
I don't know if that's really a talent. It's probably a combination of some instinct, but a lot of just doing this for a very, very long time.
Experience.
Seeing a lot.
A couple hard knocks here and there.
Yeah, you learn along the way. And you?
I think I'm good at listening.
Okay.
I think I'm good at trying to figure out how to get to the same level with the person I'm talking to, regardless of who they are, what they are. I think that's such a critical characteristic of a good advisor, a good broker. That's how you create some commonality and rapport and there's a lot of folks, especially today with technology and everything. You talk to them and you can see it in their eyes. They're watching your lips move, but they don't care. They didn't hear anything. So I think that's important, and that's something that I try to cultivate actively.
Emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Excellent. Last question. If you were hosting this podcast, what is one question you would want to ask other people in the commercial real estate field, Andy?
At what point in their career would they be? Like my stage or a younger person? What?
Your stage.
What are you most proud of? What are you most proud of? Whose careers did you help? What people did you help bring along?
You know my next question, right?
Go ahead.
What are you most proud of?
What we've created for the last 10 years. Out of, in a really bad time, a place that I think a lot of people have developed, personally and professionally, doing this business the way I think it should be done, and able to convey that to the next group of younger people entering it.
Love that. Jose, you want to answer the same question? One question that you'd want to ask somebody else in the commercial real estate field?
I don't know. I mean, when does it ever feel like you're done? When does it ever feel like you've arrived, you've finished? Where and you see, especially on some of the older guys, that definitely feel from this perspective that they had an easier way necessarily. We spend so much time, talking about the changes, this, that, the other. But if you really think about, the heavy lifting that those guys did, the previous generations of folks that did this, going back to the maps, going back to, some of the topics we talked about, getting some perspective from them, I cherish. I mean, I think it's really, really cool because it gives you, I think it grounds you in what it is that you do. So that's what I would ask. When do you get there?
And lastly, what are you most proud of?
What am I most proud of? I personally, and you've heard it a couple times now, I'm most proud of the way that I was able to figure out my passion, which is flying. I started flying when I was in high school.
Aerial photography?
And just being a pilot, right?
Yeah, I'm kidding.
We've done that actually for a client several years ago. But marrying both flying and a professional, job, and not necessarily make a living while flying. So that was probably the proudest accomplishment that I've had.
Cool.
And we able to figure out a way to implement an airplane into what we do in the markets that we cover, and had a reasonable sounding board with my partners, and it's something that we've it's a serious business tool that we use, and I'm very, very proud of that.
So when you say you flew here, you literally flew here.
Yeah.
You flew here.
And in that process, I took Andy from, a 0-hour guy that had no interest in flying to a guy that now reads newsletters on technicalities of instrument flying, in his spare time. So, mentoring him through that process was personally very rewarding because, to be able to pass something on to somebody is something I think everybody should experience, especially if you're really passionate about it, whether it's your job or something you do on the side. So I'm very proud of that.
It's fascinating. My dad was a pilot, hasn't kept up with it, but I've always been fascinated by it. It's very interesting.
Yeah. When I grow up, I'm going to be an airline captain. So
There you go. And what kind of plane is it that you flew here on today?
we flew in a Baron today.
Cool. How many seats?
6
6 seats.
twin engine.
Excellent.
Yeah, a really serious high performance machine, flying machine.
Very cool. Good stuff, guys. Well, thank you so much. I hope everybody
very much.
enjoys this
Yeah, I really
episode.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.